Hello and welcome to the next part of modes. So the next shape we're going to look at is we're going to still be on the third shape. Now what we can do with the third shape is we can get another use out of it, which is the Lydian mode. So I'm just going to quickly recap. So we started here, then we moved up to the first chord, then we moved up to the second chord, and we did the drawing mode around the second chord, which is a minor chord, the third chord, which is another minor chord, and that's where we found our Phrygian shape. So it's going to be the same shape, it's the Phrygian shape, but what happens is the maps all change. So what we need to do is we need to recontext this by changing the maps around. We do that by moving up to the next chord. So this chord, which is going to be the fourth chord, which is major, suddenly becomes the home chord for that shape. So what you do, it's the same shape as previous, but you start it from here. So that was it in one octave, but we're going to start it from here. So we need to establish our frames of reference. So our first frame of reference is going to be major chord. It's also a major seventh chord, and it's really useful to see this point of reference. So you can play an F shape, or we can extend this F shape to make our F major 7 shape. So those are your frames of reference. And what the Lydian scale is, the easiest way for me to understand it is to compare it to the major scale. So if we did our major scale up here, our intervals are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then back to the octave. So what happens here is one of the intervals changes. So the easiest way to think of it is it's a major scale with a sharpened a sharpened fourth, or if you prefer to think of it as a flattened fifth, it's the same thing, but most people would call it a sharpened fourth. So the scale goes like this. So that's the 1, 2, 3, so far so good. Then we get the change here. So this is your sharpened fourth, then you've got your fifth, your sixth, your seventh, and your octave. So we've still got this 2-finger exercise, this 3-finger exercise is still there. So to get the hang of the scale shape, it might be advisable to just play that a few times and then try and play it as a 1-octave scale. 1, 2, 3, sharpened fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, octave. 1, 2, 3, sharpened fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, octave. And then if we were to extend up, we'd have a second there. So if I was going to play all the notes within the whole scale shape, it would sound like this. So it's exactly the same shape as the Phrygian. You just have to conceptualize it differently by starting with the second finger and seeing it as a major scale with a sharpened fourth rather than as a minor scale. So basically your mapping has to change. So this exercise still holds true, but what's really useful is to see how this fits around your F shape. So your F shape is here, And this is for me is a really useful way for me to get into this mode if I'm soloing. I'm going to think, okay, there's my home shape, and then as soon as I want to get into that Lydian sound, I just drop back one fret. And suddenly it just becomes available, that scale, just by, you know, dropping down either from here to here or here to here. So again, I have to remember, if I want to resolve to a chord tone, I've got to be mindful that where the chord tones are. So the chord tones are there. So that funny little map that I was going on about on the still holds true, the pyramid shape. So for me it's quite easy, I find it quite easy to get into the shape. I just think of my F shape, my bar chord, and then just drop down, and then it just seems to fall under my fingers. But if I want to resolve a phrase, I'm just mindful once I'm in this position that I slide back up to a chord tone, or I know that that is a chord tone there, so that's a good place to land on as well to end a phrase. So those would be my target notes. So it's exactly the same idea as the Phrygian. You can do these exercises to get it under your fingers, but you just got to reconceptualize it to get around that shape rather than the minor shape below it. Okay, so that's how I think of that one. So just if you get stuck, think of it as, say, play the major scale and then play this one, and then just raise the fourth by one fret. So it is a major scale with a sharpened fourth. Okay. In terms of music, I mean, the obvious one for me is Joe Satriani's Flying in a Blue Dream. And that happens to be in C, which is, funny enough, is where we're at. So it spells it out. And another way, that strategy that I sometimes use is I might sweep through that that chord there. This is the major seventh shape, so it's like an F shape, but you add an extra note there. So it's useful to use that as a point of reference as well and see how the scale fits around it. So, and I guess the other musical example that I can think of is Fleetwood Mac Dreams. And this one's slightly different. It is F rather than C in this example. But basically it's just a two chord chug. So it's based on the fourth chord, moving up to the fifth chord if we think of it as in the key of C, but it never resolves because it never goes to even though it's in the key of C, it never resolves to C, it just chugs along on the fourth chord, going up to the fifth chord. So that's basically going from F to G. But what's happening is the F chord is kind of acting as the home chord, so that's why it's got that Lydian sound. And then the opening guitar line goes So that is a pure Lydian line. So in this next line, this is where he goes up to the sharpened fourth and ends up on the seventh. Now I'm going to play it an octave up, so you can see how that melody clearly relates to the scale shape. So. Oops. So there you go. So if you want a jam track, then as I say, a really easy one is just F to G, and then you could play it up here. Or if you want to stay in the key that we're examining, the key of G, then you could just chug along on the C, move it up to 2 frets. So that would be going up to D. And one other weird little trick that kind of works when you're exploring the Lydian scale for soloing is you can play the pentatonic that's half a step below it, and that will work as well. So but you've got to remember to resolve on one of the chord tones, otherwise it just sounds a bit lost. I mean, in the pentatonic scale, this note here is a chord tone, so that sounds okay. That isn't. I mean, it's but if you shift it up one, then you end up on a chord. Or same here. So basically it's where your Phrygian shape would be, but you play a pentatonic around it, and that will give you a Lydian sound. But the thing is to see it lurks behind this chord here. So there you go. So that's 2 strategies that you could use when exploring this scale. So I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll move on to the next one.